This episode is brought to you by Set for Life Insurance. Protect yourself against life setbacks with Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life Insurance gets you disability and life insurance at a reduced cost with their exclusive discounts. Now that's why I use them. Visit www.setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you.
No, I consider myself a nomad in that I don't really have a sense of home. I was born and raised in Germany, which I didn't really consider home for various reasons. Then I moved to the States, moved to Canada, moved back to the States. And so I moved a lot. And, for me, it was always about looking for that connection to a place or a certain community or people. And so for me, photography became about manifesting that connection.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry, you're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
Hey docs, are you looking to learn how to become a physician leader? Then Physician CEO is for you. Physician CEO is an accelerated business immersion program designed for physicians and developed by MBA faculty from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. So learn more at www.physician-ceo.com/DOTB. What's good? What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Docs Outside the Box. I am your host, Dr. Nee Darko. I hope the summer's treating y'all really good. I'm still enjoying this. We're in August, and it's still hot as heck, and I still love it. So I hope you all are staying cool. I hope you all are really enjoying the summer and doing all the things that you want to do. The quote that you heard in the beginning of this episode is from our upcoming guest, Dr. Zun Lee. And this is going to be a really good interview. But before I get into that interview, I want to do some real quick housekeeping items. First thing is I appreciate all the feedback that I get, particularly on email. You guys have been asking me some really good questions, have given me some really good feedback, and have even given and nominated guests for the show. But there's an easier way that you guys can do that. All you have to do is if you go to Docs Outside the Box, docsotb.com, go to the right-hand portion of the screen. There's a blue tab there that says Ask Me a Question. Just click on that and you can leave me a voicemail and it will show up in my email or show up in my phone and I can quickly listen to everything that you all have to say. I think it's a lot more efficient than sending an email. I've gotten a couple of people to take a bite and do it, but I think if you all really want to share your thoughts, I think this is a really good way to reach out to me. So I really appreciate that. Also, I just want to remind everybody who's been following me on Instagram, just a quick change. I am no longer broadcasting or putting out information on Instagram at Docs Outside the Box. Going to be some branding changes, and I'm now doing it on at Dr. Nee Darko. I know it's a little crazy, but just trust me. There's a rhyme, there's a reason to this. So make sure you're continuing to follow me at Dr. Nee, N-I-I, Darko on Instagram to keep up and catch up on all the new things that are going on with Docs Outside the Box. On this episode, I'm really excited to bring to you Dr. Zun Lee. I'm going to be talking to him about his life as a physician and how he is a self-taught photographer and how he lives his life as a photographer and as a visual storyteller. He's currently based in Toronto, and his work is amazing. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, The New Yorker, and Forbes, just to name a few. In 2014, actually, he put out what many say is his landmark work, his landmark project. And the name of this project was called Fatherhood, Exploring Alternate Notions of Black Fatherhood. And it's a combination of visual storytelling. It's a documentary through photographs, the best way that I can explain it. And Fatherhood won several international awards. He's also done numerous work in Ferguson, Missouri. As you all remember, there was a major riot there in 2014. So he did work during the riots as well as some work after the riots to kind of document the changes that have been occurring there. So on this show, we're going to be talking about his early life as a physician and then his transition to the corporate world of healthcare management, and now as his full-time life as a storyteller through photographs. But before we get into this interview, I've held on to this interview for close to 2 years. And it's not because I didn't like it. It wasn't because I wasn't proud of it. But when you listen to this interview, you're going to see that this interview goes to so many deeper levels than just Dr. Lee being a doc outside the box. The themes that we talked about center around fulfillment, finding self-identity and worth, as well as vulnerability. And I think that you will see that this vulnerability helps Dr. Lee to relate to the subjects that he photographs, as well as you all being able to relate to him. So I just wasn't sure initially how you all would respond to that so early with the podcast, because this episode, this interview goes to so many deeper levels. But I realized I was wrong about that. I should have put it out earlier. So I owe a couple of apologies. One to Dr. Lee, as well as to you, the audience, for not trusting you that you would really relate to this type of story. And I am so proud of this interview. And I think that you all are going to learn something about this. So send me feedback after you hear this episode. Make sure you use that speak pipe button on the right. And without further ado, I present Dr. Zun Lee. Dr. Zun Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and welcome back.
I am so glad to have you on the show. I know I've been chasing you around, so thanks for being on the show, man. I'm so glad to have you on, man.
Very much excited, and thanks for your patience, and I'm very much looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, where'd you do your medical school training? Where you're originally from?
Sure. I was born and raised in Frankfurt, Germany, and did all of my schooling and medical education there. So I went to the University of Frankfurt, which obviously is a German school. So I did my German med school education there, but also did a lot of clinical rotations in the States and in Canada, and then sat through my USMLEs. So my goal was always to move to the States and practice there. So after graduating, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I worked ATL. Miss it. There's some things I miss about it, and there's others. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad I'm no longer there.
let me guess, the traffic.
The traffic is horrible, and that was back in the day in the 90s. I moved to Atlanta in 95, and it was bad then. But I can't even imagine what it's. Well, I do go back, so it's not a fun thing to be reminded of what it means, like, to just be stuck in traffic, and basically your whole day is your whole day revolves around the car. But at that time it was exciting. My goal was to become a neurologist. So at that time, Emory had a program that was a combined residency / postdoctoral research fellowship. And, I did my first 2 years working in neuroscience and doing a bit of clinical work to support that research. So that was 2 years of sort of neurobiological, neuroscientific research. Most of it happened at Emory, and there was a lab also at Morehouse Medical School. So I sort of went back and forth. So I did that for 2 years. And, then if things had stayed the same, I would have gone on to do my neurology residency to complete the program. But after 2 years, I decided, that was no longer for me. So then I decided to branch out and do something else. So I moved to Canada, where, I'm still to this day. I'm in Toronto, Canada at the moment, but I've also lived in Chicago and Philadelphia. To make a really long story really short, I went back to school, got an MBA, and then went into management consulting. So I've worked on healthcare technology projects and kind of worked my way up the ladder there and became a senior executive at a global consulting firm. So I've done most of that work for the last 15, 20 years. And then, finally decided 2 years ago to quit that as well and become a full-time photographer. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So
Now, let's go back to when you were doing the research in neuroscience,
sure.
and you said that it wasn't for you. Can you give us a little bit of what kind of emotions or what thought process you had in your mind, and what made you decide that this wasn't for you, and you decided to, go and get an MBA?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I had a calling or anything. I didn't have a burning desire to go to med school. I'm not sure how
Hmm.
familiar you are with the German educational system, but
Not at all. Tell us,
folks go
please.
straight into professional school right after high school. So, we have grade 13. And by the time we finish that, we're like 17, 18 years old. And then you go straight. In my case, I went straight to med school. And, you don't have an idea of what you want to do, not at that age, at least, or at least I didn't. I was just a kid with good grades. And, my mom was a nurse. So she decided, okay, you're going to become a doctor. And I wasn't like
Right.
resisting it. I was like, okay, I guess, I'm kind of familiar with the medical environment because of my mom. And, I thought, why not? It's not a bad idea, but it's not like I had this urge or like burning desire to become a physician. It was more like, I was curious in the medical field, and I guess, that's what people with good grades do. They go to med school. So,
Right. Right.
but I was 17, 18. So, what do I know about life and just what I want, so I hadn't really formed these concepts in my head, to really, it's just to make sense out of them. And then you're in med school. So, it's not like you go to pre-med. You're basically stuck. Either you follow through or, you're stuck without a degree. So, med school in Germany, 6 years. So I was a bit accelerated. So I finished med school at 23, and then that's when I moved to Atlanta. So I was just really young and, a lot of
Still finding yourself, basically.
absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, 23 was just, I was just so young. I had no idea about anything. So, but when I moved to Atlanta, I realized it's just a very different medical care provider system. It's definitely, I mean, care in the States is definitely a service, not so much a human right or something that society just provides on a communal basis. So and you're taught to basically provide a service, and the whole approach to care delivery wasn't one that sat well with me because it just left out so many other aspects of care that you learn about, but then you can't really apply them in practice. So for me, it was very frustrating to sort of know better but not be able to do better because
Okay.
there's certain things that the insurance companies prescribe that you can deliver, or there's
Right.
certain protocols that are being deemed prudent because that's what is being practiced at this hospital. So and not that any of this is wrong. It's just like I was always vested in the whole person, and so for me it was hard to divest myself from what I had learned in theory to then kind of just managing care. So and so this whole notion of like, well, if I have to manage somebody's care rather than delivering healthcare, why don't I just go into the business of doing that, And so,
Yeah, I saw that. It's almost like you're merging e-health with consulting. I looked you up on LinkedIn, so that's
okay.
why I stalk all my guests. So I saw that. So like it's almost like you merged both of those and created another career from it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to abandon healthcare per se, but I thought I could make more of an impact, not in day-to-day patient care. For me, it was frustrating to see patients come in and you kind of treat their symptoms and, they're better temporarily, but then they come back with the same stuff, because you're not addressing things on a system level. So for me, I thought, if I could do that, maybe I can have more of an impact. So, I was also interested in computer technology and information technology. And so at that time, the whole buzz around EMRs and EHR started. And so I was very, very interested in this whole transition from paper to digital and how that could impact care. So
So
Mhm.
let's talk about now your life over the past 15 years. How could you summarize your last 15 years? Do you think it was do you consider that part of your practice, or were you just like, man, this is just a different part of medicine that I'm doing? Did you find more fulfillment in that?
Ah, that's a good question. Fulfillment in this in the aspect of was it a long career and hard work? Definitely. So there's a lot of fulfillment in that. But in terms of the original premise of why I wanted to do it, in terms of making an impact, I'm not exactly sure if that's sort of where my fulfillment comes from. Because
Hmm.
basically became a corporate executive. So you do a lot of corporate executive work, and the healthcare aspect kind of just falls back. you work
I see what
you
you're
work
saying.
in the industry, you work with healthcare clients, and state and local and federal governments, but is the actual work healthcare work? Probably not. I think I was more of a say as a business development executive, managing projects, managing teams, and doing most of the stuff around it. Being a subject matter expert helps, but you know, um, in terms of did I have any measurable impact on somebody's life? I would hope so, but it's hard for me to sort of make that connection. So,
So, and I don't know if you heard this term in the United States. We say, at least in healthcare, we say there are the suits, and then there are the scrubs, right? And
oh
it's not
yeah,
derogatory. It's just that
oh
obviously the
absolutely,
scrubs are more like you're in the
oh
trenches taking care of
absolutely.
patients, and then the suits. So it looks like you successfully transitioned to being a suit.
Right, that was a big transition in itself. Sort of going from scrubs to being a suit. And basically a lot of people even ask me about that. There's a lot of physicians that ask me about just like, how do I do that? I'm not interested in patient care anymore, but I want to go into administration, or become a healthcare administrator, manager of some sort. And how do I do that? So a lot of that. So transition was always a part of my life. But I guess the fact that I'm no longer doing this means the answer is, I guess I wasn't fulfilled with that either. So,
Mm, mm. Which brings us. It's a natural segue into your life as a photographer,
right.
which is a very big deal. You're not just carrying around a point and shoot. Like, you are nationally known, nationally acclaimed for
Oh
your
my
work
God.
as a photographer. Take us through that process of like what you've been doing for the past 15 years
Yeah,
to getting into photography. Like, how did that happen? Take us, we want to be a fly on the wall. What
sure.
happened?
And again, it's I think I've always had a sense about being an artist. So before I went into med school, I had an opportunity to go to art school and become a painter, and I didn't take it because, again, my mom said, you're going to become a doctor, and I did that. Um, you know, I was 18. I didn't know. I didn't like the idea of being a starving artist. But the notion of being an artist has always kind of stuck around. But it wasn't something where I wanted to pick up photography. Matter of fact, I had no interest in it whatsoever. The whole technical aspect of photography, cameras, settings, and lenses, and all that tech talk. Like it bores me to death. Like I know the stuff now because it's just part of learning the trade, but I don't want to have conversations around it. So
So wait, you don't like talking about aperture and
nah, I don't. I mean, I'll do it.
ISO?
Nah, I'll do it. I'll do the geeky stuff, and I mean, I could hang with anybody in terms of that conversation. But like, to your listeners, no, don't come to me with that stuff. But
Which True, I'm not gonna front though. That kind of pisses me off because I'm trying to learn all this stuff like ISO and aperture,
sure,
and my pictures are horrible. And you mean to tell me you're not focusing at all, and you got like
no,
your photos are all over the world and stuff? That's
wow,
amazing. That's pretty
thank
cool,
you. I
man.
mean, you have to pick it up, but it's kind of like when you talk to another surgeon, you don't talk to them about the tools of the trade. You just
I see. I see what you're
So I
saying.
mean,
I see.
clearly you have to know
Shop
it,
talk.
right? But
Shop
you
talk.
don't, yeah, compare like the technicalities of like this manufacturer versus that manufacturer, blah blah blah. I mean, you talk more about the art of the surgical practice, whatever. But yeah. So for me, it's just like, yeah, you have to know it, but hopefully there's not a lot of people that want to talk about it. But back to the question that you asked me. So about I think 6 or 7 years ago, I'm doing my corporate thing. which means a lot of flying around, a lot of, 90-hour weeks here and there. And I didn't have much of a life. And it was hard for me to actually have any outside interests because of my travel and my work. So a coworker of mine said, look, you're going to burn out. As a matter of fact, I think you're already burnt out. So you need to pick up some kind of hobby along the way. Clearly, you can't have pets or anything. So she gifted me a camera for my birthday. I think it was in 2008 or 9. I had already dabbled with photography, but more from a social media perspective. Everybody at that time was joining Flickr. And so I thought, okay, let me just go on and just see what that's all about. But I had no interest in photography. And she said, look, I'm giving you a camera. You needed to start taking some pictures. And, I demand that you take pictures and post them on Flickr so I can see that you're actually doing it, and not just saying it, but I want you to see, I want you to take pictures and post them so I can see evidence of you doing it.
Oh, wow. You had an accountability partner.
Yeah, I mean, she was also sued, and she was all about metrics. So he's a gift, but I want to, I want some measurable things happening. So I went through the motions because again, it was something that was forced upon me, and just to make her happy, I just posted pictures of just everything I was doing. Like flowers, birds, bees, building, and just I wasn't actually feeling it. It was just like, really, okay, I'm taking pictures just to please somebody else and, make them think that I'm, creating some semblance of work-life balance. But I think it was 2009 or 10. Something clicked when I took pictures of strangers in the street, and when I posted it on Flickr, people really resonated with it. So that gave me positive feedback to continue doing that, even though it was scary. And part of me was fascinated by the idea of approaching somebody that you don't know on the street and kind of forcing them to open up and give consent, but also forcing you to open up as a person and, getting them to allow you to take a picture. So that interaction is very much like, like it's like a provider-patient interaction almost.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think that you had any advantage to doing that since you already were a physician?
I wouldn't call it an advantage. It was more like an awareness of what that means and how to honor that. A lot of photography, the language in photography is very like, it's very, very much like going to war. You're grabbing shots, you're stealing souls and all that stuff. And I wasn't really part of that. I was more like, hey, can I make this a one-to-one interaction, to let somebody know I'm not here to steal your picture, but I really want to get in on your life and, get in on your story. And for me, that became the reason to continue with this work, is to really get in on somebody's story. It's like taking somebody's history, so, what is your story? Why are you here to see me? And I kind of took that same approach on the street, as to, just to approach people based on what I thought was their story, and not necessarily with the interest of taking a picture. So I ended up actually talking to a lot of people on the street, just to get their story. And more often than not, I would actually not take the picture, or, they wouldn't allow me to take their picture. And I still found that fulfilling, just to say, what, I had a great interaction with somebody. And so, yeah, I was kind of hooked on just doing that.
See, a lot of people I think would be, they would allow their fear of being rejected to kind of take over and control who and who they talk to and who they ask. And it sounds like it just encouraged you more.
Yeah, I mean, rejection is bad. I mean, and like obviously people don't see that. When I post pictures, people just see that, and they don't see the pictures that I don't get, or they don't see pictures that I miss.
Like when people say, "Nah, I'm good."
Yeah, or even more hostile. Like, some people swing at me, and then you have to.
Are you serious?
For sure. I mean, it's a very hostile environment. And
Okay.
I mean, the fact that it's legal for you to do this work, that you people in a public space, you're allowed to legally take pictures of, and you do not have to ask for consent or permission. That's just the law. But who knows that? People just assume that it's not okay, and they just expect you to ask. So when you do that, and I don't just take pictures from like afar, I really go up to somebody and just start snapping, and so people yeah, they get quite hostile, and I think rightfully so. Because I remember when the street photographers in New York take my picture, I hate it. So I was like, please take that, please erase it, or like, what are you doing? So I know how I react to somebody taking my picture. So I can only imagine how people respond to me being in somebody's space, and it's, yeah, I mean, sometimes people kind of react in a very physical way. So you have to be you have to be prepared for that as well. But it's all part of the excitement of going after it, So it just added to the thrill, I guess.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Understanding how to run a business in medicine will put you at a unique advantage in the future. Whether it's leading a hospital, practice, or starting a new venture, the Physician CEO program will put you in focus from day one. Physician CEO is an accelerated business immersion program developed by MBA faculty from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. The Physician CEO program provides an intensive MBA-style education made up of modules, with each module covering topics from leadership to entrepreneurial ventures. Because of their individualized structure, each participant leaves the program with their 1, 3, and even 5-year business plan, all designed to function in the real world. If you're a physician who is looking to start your own venture, lead your practice or department, or even start planning for succession out of medicine, then you can't afford to miss this opportunity. Class is filling up. Learn more at www.physician-ceo.com/DOTB. You mentioned on your website that your street portraits, they say as much about you as what they're saying about the subject.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you figured out what they say about you?
Oh, I think.
That's a complex question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, it's very valid because I definitely know. Well, I always knew that I gravitated towards some people and not others. And people would even make those comments even way back in the day when I just started out. Like, you always seem to take certain people's pictures, and people commented, and at that time I thought, okay, clearly there's something going on. I just don't have the answers. Maybe they'll come to me. But I think I gravitate to people who seem to have a story that resonates with my own. And I wrote this on my website as well that I consider myself a nomad in that I don't really have a sense of home. I was born and raised in Germany, which I didn't really consider home for various reasons. Then I moved to the States, moved to Canada, moved back to the States. And so I moved a lot. And, for me, it was always about like looking for that connection to a place or a certain community or people. And so for me, photography became about like, manifesting that connection. So I always got a sense from certain people that were also struggling with these same questions of connection and finding a home, either physically or more figuratively, that these were people that I was interested in photographing, so that part of why I take pictures of certain people is something that I know for sure is that everyone that I photograph kind of shares a similar story with me, whether it's real or something that I imagine based on our interaction.
Your photography, obviously, and your street portraits, kind of at one point you've transitioned over to Father Figure, which is a book or a collection of all of your pictures that came out in 2014. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
In 2014, where you are filming, or excuse me, you are taking pictures of different portraits of African American men with their children, and obviously Father Figure type of imagery. Like, how did you transition to that? Like, or why did that become a strong aspect or main aspect of your photography?
That's a good question. I think again it was in 2010 or 11. I was thinking about sort of the next step in my photography, and at that time I wasn't even thinking of making it a career. It was more, people started paying attention. And had a lot of social media attention at that time. But, people are like, what's the next step? You got something, but what do you want to do with it? So I took a workshop in New York with, famous photographer who was part of Magnum, which is like a really well-known agency. But they kind of reiterated what a lot of people were saying. Like it seems like you're gravitating towards certain subjects and subject matters in your photography. Clearly there's a story here, but what is your story? And can you examine that? And maybe, by working through what your story is, you will get to another place in your photography, So, and that's really what spawned the whole project is like, okay, you know what? Clearly I'm gravitating towards certain people in my street photography, but, what is my story and why am I doing this and why, or how can I bring this into visual work? So for me, it was, an exploration of my own past and sort of my own coming to terms with, some of the things that I had found out in my past, and then working that into my photography in a very tangible way, So, and this was a way to reconcile a lot of my past, but also to sort of give people a sense of, this is who I am, this is why I'm doing this, and these are the people in the communities that give me a sense of home, rather than just saying, I'm photographing strangers. I'm kind of like holding up the mirror to my own life and saying that this is really sort of who I am, and sort of making that declaration.
Now, this is spawning from the relationship that you did not have with your father growing up.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, part of me is sort of exploring that. And it's a bit more complex than that, in that, I grew up with a Korean mom and Korean dad, thinking that these are my biological parents. And then much later in life, I had already moved to the States. I found out that my actual biological dad is African American. And there's not much information I can get from my family, for various reasons. But, clearly that discovery has impacted me in many ways. But the other reality, and that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, is that in Germany, I actually grew up around Black families since I was age 3. So, and in a way, they raised me and gave me values and gave me a perspective on life that informed me to this day. So, even exploring this through father figure, it definitely deals with father absence and the things that I may have missed as a child, but also it's an homage to the many African American men that I knew from, very little, since I was very little, that actually stepped up to the plate and showed me many different things in life that I still hold on to. So, so in a way, it's an homage to all these sort of unsung heroes that I know exist, and without whom I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So, and that's another reality in the communities that I work and live in, that often doesn't get told either. That there's many ways that African American men are present, and that doesn't really get told. Or people don't want to tell that story because it would show a different side to Black America that a lot of people don't want to see.
No, I appreciate you doing that, and I appreciate you not glorifying the problem, but actually finding a solution or an alternative story that is positive, as opposed to harping on the constant negatives. So I do appreciate you doing that, and I do appreciate overall your honesty about your upbringing. I mean, it really is. It makes it easy to relate to you, and because it's such a common issue within the world now. It's not just an issue that was taboo. It's just these things happen.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's one way also to kind of acknowledge community. Because people always ascribe a lot of trauma to that, and I want to always share with people that despite the fact that I share a history with many friends that also acknowledge that they didn't know their father or didn't have a great relationship with their father. It's also an acknowledgement of like how that can actually create a sense of community in a way, where when I first discovered that my biological father was African American, a lot of people that I knew back in Atlanta were like, well, welcome to the club. And not to minimize the
Right.
problem, but it's like we know what that is. You don't have to even tell us. Like we're experiencing the same thing. We know what that's like, and that understanding is really is critical, because it's also a way of acknowledging that my work is not, people say, well, you're showing all these African American fathers, but don't you think it's a huge problem? And I'm like, of course it's a problem. Like, my work isn't about denying the fact that father absence is a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and it's a growing problem. My beef is with the media that, why father absence is a huge problem. Why is the face of father absence usually African American when we know it's not? So,
Right.
And it's something that's propagated in the media to this day, is that, when we talk about father absence, more often than not, the example that is mentioned is somebody who's African American, when it really cuts across all races and ethnic groups and classes. Even, it's not something that happens just in poor communities. It happens in upper middle class communities as well. And so,
Absolutely.
it's more an acknowledgement of, can we have a conversation around father absence, but not stigmatize an entire community around it. And so let's talk about father absence and what that means, but let's also acknowledge that it is, not something that's exclusive to the Black community.
I love that answer.
Thank you.
Now, is there any aspects of medicine that sneak into photography, or what you do with photography?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think everything I do is, I approach it like a patient-provider interaction. So really, a lot of my photography hinges on getting access to somebody on a very intimate basis, and so for me, it is very much about establishing trust. And that's a lot of work that people don't see. Is like, like, people always ask me, how did you get that picture? How did you get so close to that family or that person? And I'm like, there's a lot of work that happens before I even press the shutter, and just in terms of approaching somebody, getting to know their story, them getting to know my story. And again, 9 out of 10 times, I get rejected. So, and I have to honor that.
That often?
Yeah, I mean,
Really?
even just with this project, I would say that, I approached maybe 400 fathers and families, and out of them, maybe 4 or 5 ended up working with me for the book.
Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a 99% rejection rate, and that's cool. I mean, that's just, you have to walk into this kind of situation with your eyes open and realize that's just part of the game, and just because you didn't get to take a picture doesn't mean that was a failure. A lot of fathers that I talk to, they're very much excited about the project, and they do want to explore working with me, and then they realize, nah, I don't think this is going to work, or, I'm like, when they come up with issues, you can't sort of push them towards something that you think, might be helpful for you, because the photography will suffer. It'll show in the pictures. If it's forced or if it's artificial, it'll just show. And so you have to just let that go. But at the same time, a lot of fathers that I ended up working with, they say no at the beginning, or even after you gain trust. There's phases where they reconsider and say no, but many come back later and say, okay, we're ready now. And so it's just like any relationship, like, it goes through its phases. So, and you have to kind of work with that. Just because you gain somebody's trust doesn't mean that the trust is always going to be there. It's, something that can be given but also revoked. And it's much like any sort of challenging patient interaction. Like, you kind of have a history and a career, from, people talk about a patient career in healthcare, and so you kind of just accompany people on their journey or their career as patients, and as a provider, you kind of learn how to just roll with the punches, and kind of let people be who they are. And so a lot of that aspect of care sort of finds its way into my photography. I'm not here to sort of push people into a certain visual story. I'm like, if it happens, it's great. If it doesn't happen, I'm not their daddy. I can't expect more from them than they're willing to give. And while that might be frustrating, I think all these years in healthcare kind of prepared me for that frustration. So,
Okay.
and I think a lot of photographers that are younger and sort of coming up, they get hung up on, not being able to sort of deal with it well, and they just move on to something else really quickly. And for me, I'm just here for the long haul. So, and the goal was never to publish something in terms of a book, but just to kind of accompany people on their journey. So for me, that was really the fulfilling aspect, is to just be there for people. It's just that the camera allowed me, or it gave me a tool to do that and to document that process. But in many cases, it's exactly like any patient interaction, that you have on a longer term basis. So sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not so great.
Right. Absolutely. Take the good with the bad, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Now, how did Father Figure, and obviously being published, how did you transition from Father Figure to, on your website, you have Black Love Matters, which appears to be around the riots and the uprising within Ferguson, Missouri. And then you also have Fade Resistance also. Can you speak a bit about those two projects also?
Sure. I mean, I think personally there's a continuity in terms of all of my work, because even with Father Figure, I wasn't striving to do something iconic, or to shoot many scenes or moments that are iconic, or many fathers that America would deem are iconic. But focus really on the everyday family, the everyday father, and sort of many everyday moments that kind of usually get lost in the shuffle. Like very private, fleeting moments between fathers and their children, that happen on an everyday basis, but we don't get to see them. And that's sort of the feedback I use to kind of propel me forwards, is when people look at my images, there's nothing really, how would I say that? There's nothing dramatic about them. They're just very intimate and very sort of quiet and very low key. And a lot of people looked at that and they said, you know what? I never noticed it, but now when I go to New York and go on in 125th Street, I see a lot of fathers with their kids. After school is out, I see them on the bus. I see them waiting, to get food. I see them. I notice them. I never used to notice that. And to me, that's a sign that people's attention is shifting somewhat.
Absolutely.
They're not.
That's got to be promising.
Absolutely. Because I think, again, it's all in these sort of everyday moments that I think a lot of story happens in these sort of very quiet moments. It's not in the big, dramatic sort of media coverage that we kind of tend to expect. And same with the work I do in terms of other projects, whether you refer to Ferguson and Black Love Matters, or even the Fade Resistance project. It's really foregrounding, the everyday reality of African American life in the States. Because again, we focus so much on what's not working, like the pathology and the dysfunction, and media is very much ready to sensationalize that, and at every step, because that's what sells, is the sensationalism of Black death and Black pathology and the negativity that surrounds Black communities. People are very much ready to point that out, and it's always something that makes a front page story, and we don't really focus on everyday stuff that's there, but people don't want to see it, or it gets lost in the shuffle again. And for me, I want to say, no, it's worthwhile noticing. And so for me, it's worthwhile capturing and pointing out, but also I want people to notice that while the media is focusing on the sensationalism, there's so much that people, if they open their eyes, can actually see.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, just going through your pictures right now, I noticed that there are very few pictures of the actual riots and more of just life there. People going to church, people opening their shops, people standing maybe outside of the rubble,
right.
Of some of the destruction that occurred. And that's very fascinating, very poignant that you noticed that and mentioned that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, again, not to gloss over these problems. People say, you want to sugarcoat your problems. I'm like, no, but part of humanity and part of being, part of living is that you're also trying to overcome, you're also trying to address. You're also trying to not just succumb to the struggle, but you're trying to like make sense out of all this in your daily lives, and not in big iconic ways, but any mother or father is just trying to do what they need to do is to take care of themselves and their children, and then what does that look like, and it's very basic things that I think, again, everybody can relate to. Everybody that's a mother or father can relate to a mother or father struggling to provide for their children.
In terms of the conversation that you say that you have with various folks, what's been the feedback? What's been the conversation that you've gotten from your previous colleagues, whether it be medical or within the corporate world?
Wow, that's a good question, because in many ways, it's hard to have a conversation with people who I would call my coworkers, because a lot of it is, I think people don't necessarily accept the fact that I'm gone. So, it's sort of like, nice that you're doing this work, but, you're supposed to be here, sitting here, being miserable with us in this meeting. So it's
misery loves company.
Right. And so it's like, who are you trying to be, trying to escape this corporate drudgery. So I wouldn't say it's envy or jealousy. It's more, like when I talk about my photographic work, there's very little common ground in terms of, people who express themselves in terms of corporate speak. And I mean, my kind of work especially requires a lot of vulnerability. So I talk a lot about vulnerability and allowing yourself to be seen as much as I want people to see my pictures, and so it's an uncomfortable conversation, and I think a lot of people are not ready to have that conversation.
Are you still doing this full time, or is this part time? Your photography, is it part time?
Oh no, yeah, I'm doing this full time. So
Okay.
I'm definitely doing it full time. So like 2 years ago, I quit my corporate job, and it was with the full intention of, again, not saying I'm a full-time photographer, but like I want to focus on my art. And I want to focus on the needs of my community. So it became that acute for me, especially after Ferguson. And I mean, Ferguson is sort of just one of many examples, but it became important for me to say I'm playing a part in the overall effort to bring awareness, and not just to bring awareness, but to like have different conversations, and move the needle just a little bit with my work. So, it's all, again, back to the earlier conversation we had around making a difference. So, it wasn't with the sense of I want to become a full-time professional photographer. It was more like, how can I best make a difference? So who knows, maybe I'll find my way back into corporate. That job is always going to be there.
Right, absolutely. I was going to ask you, what about even medicine? Do you ever think about going back into medicine, or is it something that for a fact that door is completely shut?
Yeah, definitely. Actual care delivery stuff, I don't think I want to ever get involved in that again.
Hey, honesty.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, it's and not because I hate it. It's again, it's this notion of like, where can I best make an impact? The desire to connect with people and to help them, or to be part of their support system. And I think that desire has never left me. But I think for me, the question is always, where can I best do that?
I agree with you. I think it's recognizing your passions, right? And rather than go through the doldrums of something that you don't really feel very passionate about, you found your passion. And I think one of the big reasons why I started this show is to start the conversation of, why don't we stop being shy,
right,
and considering our passions, whether it's in medicine or out of medicine, taboo.
Right. And it's such a taboo topic, because I think there's a lot of stigma around doctors saying, I hate my job, because you're supposed to be grateful. You're supposed to be passionate. So much was given to you, and that's true. Like the fact that you graduate with an MD or a DO means that, a lot of people invested a lot of energy in you to get to this point. And so there's always this sense that you need to pay it back or pay it forward. And again, I'm not disagreeing with that. I think a lot of why we do what we do rests on that.
Now, I have some quick, fast questions for you. We're getting towards the end of the interview. I'm going to ask you some questions. You just give me the first thing that pops in your mind. You game?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's do this. What's one thing you want listeners to get from this podcast?
That it's okay to be a physician but explore other options as well.
Love it. Love it. What can the audience expect from you in the next 10 years?
Wow, 10 years is a long time frame, but
All right, let's do 5
no,
years.
it's a valid question because I think having worked in clinical, having worked as a corporate person, and now working full time as an artist, and still trying to earn my way through that, I think I'll spend the next 5 to 10 years working through how can I combine all these different experiences into like one holistic career, just because I did something in the past and I moved to something else doesn't mean that I'm leaving it behind, and there's always this either or mentality in the States where you can't be this if you do that. And I want to say, no, you can holistically bring everything that you did in the past into one package. So for me, it's about figuring out how to do that.
Is there any one piece of advice that you would give yourself? Let's take yourself back to pre-med, or there wasn't a pre-med version of you, but let's say a med student version of Chun. Is there any piece of advice now that you would give to yourself back then?
Oh, definitely. Many, many different pieces, but like the one thing that comes to mind is live outside of your books. The best education I received was outside of the classroom, just by living life and having a variety of life experiences. And that informs you as a professional also. It forms the way you deliver care. It informs the way that you look at the practice of medicine, much more so than you can get from a classroom or from a textbook. So I would encourage people just to live life. Again, I was 23 when I graduated med school, and I was just too young. I mean, it's okay to bring more life experience into med school, so maybe that's something I would offer up, is for people to seek more of these direct life experiences.
Love it. Love it. Now, the last sentence/question that I'm going to present to you is something that I ask all of my guests. It's a statement that says, "I'm not just a doc, I'm a," and it's a statement to kind of, kind of put you in a little square box for a little bit, but just give us an opportunity to see how you describe yourself outside of just being a physician. So, Dr. Zun Lee, I present to you, I'm not just a doc, I'm a
storyteller.
That's really good. I like that one. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent answer. Excellent answer. Well, Dr. Lee, I just want to say thank you very much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
This was amazing. This turned out to be a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Thank you.
Very dynamic. You're very soulful. And I think not only just me, but I think the audience really got a chance to really identify with you and relate with you because you're very humble and you come off as very relatable. So thank you very much for doing this. This is going to be an excellent show.
Oh, you're so welcome, and thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. Episode 64 is officially over. Really had a good time interviewing Dr. Lee. I want to thank him again for his time, as well as the work that he does, and as well for being very vulnerable on this episode. It really helped to relate to him, and I think you all learned a lot from him also. Please, I'm really interested in hearing feedback about this episode. There's so many different ways that you can leave your feedback. You can either use the speak pack button on the right-hand side of the screen on docsotb.com, or you can reach out to me through Instagram or even on Facebook. Remember, for Instagram, we are now at Dr. Nee Darko. That's NIIDARKO. And I'll catch you guys on the next episode. But before we jet, remember one thing. We only got one life. Let's make it count and live outside the box. Peace.